Okay, so let's start. So let's start reading Francesca Albanese's new report because I think it's very important. It's called Gaza Genocide, a Collective Crime. The summary is: the ongoing genocide in Gaza is a collective crime sustained by the complicity of influential third states that have enabled long-standing systemic violations of international law by Israel, framed by colonial narratives that dehumanize the Palestinians. This live-streamed atrocity has been facilitated through third states' direct support, material aid, diplomatic protection, and in some cases, active participation. It has exposed an unprecedented chasm between peoples and their governments, betraying the trust on which global peace and security rest. The world now stands on a knife edge between the collapse of international rule of law and hope for renewal. Renewal is only possible if complicity is confronted, responsibilities are met, and justice is upheld. So essentially, this is Francesca bringing all the receipts with her. Basically saying, you messed up, West. You thought you were going to be, you were not going to have to deal with this, but you will. So we're not going to read it all, of course, because we don't have time. But there are some key sections. I already perused it a little bit. So there are a few sections that I think are important to read. So the legal framework. International law imposes a range of obligations on all states to respect, prevent, and bring an end to violations whenever they occur in the context of the occupied Palestinian territory. The most relevant are: A. Direct obligations all states owe to the Palestinian people, especially the obligations to respect their right of self-determination and freedom from apartheid and genocide, and to the state of Palestine, while respecting the principles of non-interference, territorial integrity, political independence, and self-defense. Obligations erga omnes, that is, obligations that are opposable to the entirety of the international community. Arising from the serious breach of parentary norms, the obligation to respect self-determination of the people, the prohibition of genocide, racial segregation, apartheid, and territorial acquisition through force by Israel, including a positive obligation to individually and cooperatively bring any unlawful situation to an end through lawful means, and negative duties to recognize as lawful the situation arising from their breach, or 3, render aid or assistance to maintain the situation. This is not at all controversial. This is like standard run-of-the-mill international law. Everyone agrees that this is how it works. C. Obligations of due diligence to prevent specific violations of international law, including the obligations to prevent genocide, triggered when a serious risk arises, 2. Ensure respect for international humanitarian law, triggered when violations are likely or foreseeable, and 3. Cooperate to prevent crimes and attacks on international protected persons. Basically, from that standard, every state should be on notice ever since, at the very least, the provisional measures of the ICJ, right? This is why, ironically, even though maybe it shouldn't have been that easy for Nicaragua, I think Nicaragua is going to win that case against Germany, because states have flaunted their obligations so massively, so stupidly, that they cannot claim that they didn't know that the standard for the obligations to prevent have been triggered. D. Obligations to refrain from aiding or assisting or directly participating in international wrongful acts of other states, including aggression, apartheid, and genocide. While international law does not prescribe the specific actions that third states must take to discharge their obligations, certain obligations are assessed according to results. Where these obligations are duties of conduct, state responsibility depends on the circumstances involved, gravity of the violation in question, level of influence over the violating state, and the means available to exert such influence. A state fails in its obligation if it does not use all available means to discharge it. Certain areas of international law do specify means available to states, and the opinion here is regarding expected actions, which are relevant to assessing third state compliance with their obligations. These include forcible measures, arms embargoes, trade embargoes, denial of safe passage, prosecution and punishment, and oh, sorry, I skipped the part. Okay. The conduct of states and international organizations constitutes complicity when their actions aid and assist in a way that 1. Materially or substantially enables or facilitates the commission of the wrongful act, and 2. Are done with full knowledge of the circumstances, including the imminent or actual occurrence of the wrongful act, and, where relevant, the special intent of the perpetrator. State complicity is established when there is a nexus between the actions of the two states in question in the serious breach of parental norms. So basically, she's laying the groundwork of. Later, she's going to say, "See what these states did complies with the standard I laid out." So let me just skip this part. It's not really that relevant. And so here, in the last 2 years, Israeli crimes have dramatically escalated. By 20 October 2023, international law experts, genocide scholars, and human rights organizations have warned of impending genocide. On 26 January 2024, the ICJ confirmed the serious risk of genocide in Gaza, giving rise to state obligations to prevent and punish incitement, commission, or complicity. By May 2024, the court had issued 2 further provisional measures orders and made judicial comments in Nicaragua v. Germany. The ICC prosecutor has sought arrest warrants for senior Israeli officials, and third states had actual or constructive knowledge of the ongoing international crimes they had failed to prevent, triggering a heightened responsibility to act. In other words, you knew. You can't claim that you didn't know, right? Then, legal standard continues. Here you go. Intersecting components of the Gaza genocide. Genocide under the guise of diplomatic and political actions. This is not the part I wanted to read. Hold on a second. Okay, let's read this really quickly. Prolonged political and diplomatic support by influential third states has enabled Israel to initiate and sustain its assault on the Palestinian people in the past 2 years, entrenched complicity marked by narrative manipulations and reproduction of Israeli fabrications have muted the urgent calls for action and obscured the web of political, financial, and military interests at play. The long-standing failure to address egregious violations of international law by Israel, threatening international peace and security, has normalized and deepened relations with it, entrenching oppression, domination, and erasure. Following 7 October 2023, most Western leaders parroted Israeli narratives disseminated by Israel and corporate media, repeating debunked claims and erasing core distinction between combatants and civilians. Israelis were depicted as civilians and hostages, and Palestinians as Hamas terrorists, legitimate or collateral targets, human shields, or lawfully detained prisoners. Joining a long history of the savage, denied protections of international law, revived by the war on terror discourse, Western states helped to justify the genocide against Palestinians. On 9 October 2023, immediately after Israel announced a tightening siege on Gaza, key Western leaders expressed support for self-defense of Israel. Unwarranted under Article 51 of the UN Charter. Besides, Biden repeatedly cited President Biden repeatedly cited unsubstantiated reports of beheaded babies. British opposition leader Keir Starmer defended Israel's right to cut off water and power to civilians. This environment fueled a ferocious Israeli assault, and then it goes on to describe this assault. Post-October 2023, the United States used its veto power. Australia, Canada, EU, New Zealand, and the UK sanctioned some extremist settlers and organizations. And in June 2025, Israeli Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich were sanctioned. Yet such isolated actions effectively condone the Israeli state system and structures as a whole. Yeah, if you only sanction people, you're not really finding a problem with the structural, let's say the structural structures, the structural problems with the relationship between Israel and Palestine, right? So Arab and Muslim states have long supported the Palestinian cause. Nevertheless, these actions have not been decisive, even amid Israeli aggression against 6 Arab states, reflecting the complexity of regional geopolitics. Normalization through the US-brokered Abraham Accords has also shifted economic incentives. This is important because bringing the receipts for states in general, including Arab states, I think is important. I think everyone has failed the test of Gaza. Then it talks about the South Africa case. It talks about the Nicaragua case. So essentially, it's talking about the diplomatic clout, right? Since October 2023, only Belize, Bolivia, Colombia, and Nicaragua. I want to note that these states are, well, in the Americas, I should say, because Belize, I count Belize as a Latin American state, but technically, since they speak English, they're not, exactly Latin American in the geography of the stuff. So, but yeah, Latin America, let's say, leading the charge here. They have suspended diplomatic relations with Israel, and only 6 states, Bahrain, Chad, Chile, Honduras, Jordan, Turkey, and South Africa, have downgraded their relations with Israel. The most notable efforts have come from the Hague Group initiative launched in January 2025, led by Colombia and South Africa. On September 2025, many states, including Egypt, Indonesia, Jordan, Pakistan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the UAE, endorsed the Trump plan, despite its silence on ending the occupation, ensuring accountability, providing transitional justice, and its imposition of a temporary mechanism of imperial foreign governance for Gaza that further undermines rather than realizes Palestinian self-determination. So this is important because we discussed this last week. The Trump plan is unlawful under international law. It's simple as that. Because Israel has zero right to determine what happens in Gaza. Israel's only internationally allowed act in Gaza is to leave, and in the West Bank is to leave. That's the only thing that they can do that is legal in those territories, because they are destroying the right of the Palestinian people, which is a jus cogens norm, etc. So the Trump plan, instead of ending the occupation, consolidates it by incorporating this internationalized US-led board to maintain Gaza under control. So it's good that this is being said out loud, but this isn't the most explosive claim of the report. So B, military ties providing the means of destruction. While UN resolutions have called for arms embargoes on Israel since 1976, many states have continued supplying it with military support and arms transfers. Israel is disproportionately dependent on weapons imports, with a proportion of their total trade more than double the OECD average and over 4 times greater than the United States. This international supply has continued even as the evidence of genocide has mounted. The United States, Germany, Italy among the largest suppliers. Only few Western states, notably Spain and Slovenia, have cancelled contracts and imposed embargoes. The United States has financially and militarily supported Israel since its creation. Following the 1967 war, I would say during the 1948 war, not so much, but after that, yes. Israel became the leading recipient of U.S. foreign military financing, FMF. The 60-year strategic partnership between the United States and Israel has been underpinned by a legislated commitment to Israeli qualitative military edge, almost 30 years of agreements ensuring Israel-U.S. military cooperation, a steady supply of military and economic aid to Israel, and preferential access to U.S. military sales. The third U.S.-Israel MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, effective until 2028, guarantees $3.3 billion a year in this is foreign military financing, plus $500 million a year for missile defense. The U.S. has supplied arms to Israel through military sales. The U.S. accounts for 2/3 of annual Israeli arms imports and through access to the U.S. weapons stockpile in Israel. Israel also has a special permission to use FMF to purchase Israeli-made weapons. Meanwhile, Israeli purchases of F-15, F-16, and F-35 fighter jets and munitions is supported by access to procurement funds to Israeli subsidiaries in the U.S. Essentially, Israel can get whatever weapon it wants from the United States. It's like $3 billion corporation, right? So here it continues. On 20 October 2023, the Biden administration announced it would request an additional $14.3 billion for Israel. In April 2024, this passed Congress as a $26.4 billion package for Israeli defense. Just as Israel threatened the Rafah invasion, previously stated red line for President Biden. Israel was later exempted from the Trump administration freeze on military aid. So by September 2024, the U.S. had reportedly supplied 57,000 artillery shells, 36,000 rounds of cannon ammunition, 20,000 M4A1 rifles, 13,981 anti-tank missiles, and 8,700 MK 82 500-pound bombs. By April 2025, Israel had 751 active sales valued at $39.2 billion. Both the Biden and Trump administrations have enabled this constant flow of weapons, except for a short pause in the delivery of 500-pound and 2,000-pound bombs on the eve of the Israeli attack on Rafah in May 2024, which lasted until July 2024. So nothing. Until January 2025 for 2,000-pound bombs. So nothing, right? Germany has been the second largest arms exporter to Israel during the genocide, with supplies ranging from frigates to torpedoes. German leaders have justified this support based on its perceived post-Holocaust obligations to Israel. In addition to suspending ethical and legal assessments of the Israeli occupation from October 2023 to July 2025, Germany issued individual export licenses worth 489 million euros, 15% of all licenses to Israel in 22 years. This does not include any arms transferred under collective licenses or on the government-to-government basis, although Chancellor Merz temporarily suspended future exports approvals in August 2025. 2.46 million euros in exports were approved a month later. So what Germany has done is essentially say, we're not doing it, but they're going to continue to do it. It's so dishonest. The United Kingdom has also played a key role in military collaboration with Israel, despite internal opposition. From its bases in Cyprus, the UK has enabled a crucial US supply line to Tel Aviv and flown over 600 surveillance missions over Gaza throughout the genocide, sharing intelligence with Israel. Flight numbers and durations, often coinciding with major Israeli operations, suggest detailed knowledge and cooperation in the destruction of Gaza, extending beyond hostage rescue, which is, the British excuse here is to say, oh, we were helping them find the hostages. I mean, they're still doing it, so probably not the reason, since there are no more hostages being kept there, at least not living hostages, right? Other states have supplied parts, components, and weapons to Israel through an opaque system that obscures transfers, including dual use and indirect transfers. This is interesting. Between October 2023 and October 2025, 26 states sent at least 10 consignments of arms and ammunition to Israel, the most frequent being China, including Taiwan, India, Italy, Austria, Spain, Czechia, Romania, and France. Military aircraft and land vehicles, drones, dogs, and dual-use items such as integrated circuits are harder to track. States also engage in indirect transfers by supplying components for arms used by Israel. The F-35 Stealth Strike Fighter program, key to the Israeli military assault in Gaza, involves 19 states: Austria, Belgium, Canada, Czech Republic, Denmark, Finland, Germany, Greece, Italy, Japan, Netherlands, Norway, Poland, South Korea, Romania, Singapore, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and the United States, supplying components and parts to Israel. 17 of them have ratified the Arms Trade Treaty. Despite litigation, in the UK specifically, in the Netherlands, Canada, Australia, Denmark, and the United Kingdom, all of which defended their roles, and some cancellation of indirect exports, states continue to transfer F-35 parts heavily used in the genocidal destruction of Gaza. So, again, this is all with direct knowledge that there's a genocide happening, right? The first thing that she did is prove you cannot claim that you didn't know. And then she's saying, and look all the weapons you sent to someone who was committing a genocide. States frequently deploy two arguments to justify arms trade with Israel. Such arms are said to be either defensive or non-lethal. The Arms Trade Treaty does not recognize either distinction, but requires a holistic assessment of how all arms, parts, and components will ultimately be used, given that the occupation of Palestinian territory is an ongoing unlawful use of force in violation of the UN Charter. Nothing Israel does there can be understood as defensive in nature. This is another thing, like, on the legal argument, this is correct. Right? Israel is committing an act of aggression, and therefore nothing is doing falls under the banner of self-defense. Yes. But at the same time, there's another issue to consider. Israel is not a, say, poor state with no money or anything like that. It has a very solid economy. When states say, we cannot stop sending Iron Dome interceptor missiles, for example, because then, oh my god, Israel will not be able to defend itself against missiles being launched against it, that is simply not true. All that means is that the massive amount of money that Israel spends in offensive weapons, quote unquote offensive, I don't think there's any such thing as offensive and defensive weapons, but like, all that money will need to not be spent on offense, it will need to be spent on defense, right? It will need to be spent on those interceptor missiles. Israel will not go without interceptor missiles, it builds its own, right? So all it means is it will need to rearrange its budget so that it spends more on the interceptors than on, say, 2,000-pound bombs. So it does make a difference. No one is saying here, oh, Israel should like not have any missiles to defend itself against, missiles from Hamas or from Islamic Jihad or even from Iran. No one's really saying that, because that's not the reality of what would happen. Israel would have those missiles. It would just need to pay for them themselves. Let me see. Thousands of citizens from the United States, Russia, France, Ukraine, and the United Kingdom, among others, have served in the Israeli military since October 2023. Few have been investigated and non-prosecuted for crimes in Gaza. Third states also continue to purchase Israeli weapons and military technology. A unique selling point of Israeli military technology is that it is tested on Palestinians under occupation and related military activities. The ongoing genocide has enabled Israel to expand the range of weapons and surveillance systems tested on the Gaza population. As a result, the value of arms export increased by 18% during the genocide, with exports to the EU more than doubling and accounting for 54% of Israeli military exports in 2024. Other significant destinations include Asia and the Pacific and Arab countries under the Abraham Accords. So, military companies have even used footage from Gaza of like their weapons killing innocent civilians and saying, "See, this is an interesting, very valuable weapon. Buy it, purchase it." Right? It is kind of insane when you think about it, because like it's as if Palestinians are not human beings, right? That's the reality of it all. Like if you're advertising your weapons by saying, "Look how efficiently it kills people" during a genocide, then I'm sorry, but you're a monster. C. Weaponization of aid, creating the living conditions for genocide. Some third states have facilitated the degradation of living conditions of the Gaza population, including by the very means of their participation in the provision of aid. Already before 7 October, the illegal Gaza blockade imposed by Israel and Egypt, with severe restrictions on the movement of goods, even down to calculated caloric intake, had made 80% of the population aid dependent, with 1.1 million relying on UNRWA for food and basic services. The agency is the bedrock of economic, social, and humanitarian support for the Palestinians, especially in Gaza. Its embeddedness in the local population allows it to run more than 400 sites for aid distribution amid the genocide. Since October 2023, Israel has turned existing restrictions into a full blockade. It was limited on average of 107 trucks per day, to an average of 107 trucks per day, less than one-third of pre-2023 levels. In March 2025, Israel further tightened its siege. By August 2025. Famine in Gaza was declared by the International Food Security Phase Classification, at the IPC, and at least 461 people have died from malnutrition-related cases. In violation of its obligations to ensure adequate means of survival, the genocidal campaign by Israel has deliberately sought to destroy the humanitarian system sustaining the occupied population. It has done so through directly bombing UNRWA warehouses, food distribution sites, schools, and clinics, killing more than 370 personnel, defamation campaigns against UNRWA, and promoting ad hoc pseudo-humanitarian agencies. Again, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is not a humanitarian foundation. It is a killing machine. It is a sadistic way of moving Palestinians around Gaza so that it can be ethnically cleansed more efficiently, and so that Palestinians can be killed in so-called, oops, there's a risk because there's too many people going for the aid that I've limited, so there's a stampede, I need to protect myself, I'm going to shoot at unarmed people that are starving. It's a monstrosity. It is systematic killing in one of the worst ways I can think of in the 21st century. When Israel alleged without evidence that UNRWA staff were involved in the events of October 7th, 18 states immediately suspended funding, uncritically endorsing the Israeli narrative. Despite inconclusive investigations, the accused staff were fired, and most donors took months to resume contributions to UNRWA. The United States, its largest donor, passed a law to prohibit U.S. funding. When the Israeli Knesset took the unprecedented step of outlawing UNRWA operations on 30 January 2025, only some states took action by seeking an ICJ advisory opinion, which is the bare minimum. The brutal attack on the UN system was complemented by its attempted substitution with an Israeli-US controlled aid mechanism, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation used aid distribution through military-run sites staffed with US mercenaries to facilitate the forced displacement of Palestinians towards Egypt. This seemed to anticipate the so-called Gaza Riviera plan, which would have led to Palestinians' forced displacement. From March 2025 onwards, amid the total siege-induced famine and the destruction of the 23 UNRWA sites in 4 months, 2,100 unarmed civilians were killed and hundreds of thousands were injured by Israeli forces and US contractors at GHF. Despite this, it was only after President Trump's peace plan that the GHF was disbanded, which is in itself evidence that it was a genocidal tool, right? If it were so awesome, then it would have stayed. Let's also, like, for a second, also the GHF, it is, again, systematic killing of people, right? It was created with a specific purpose. It is part of the genocide. It is actually the most systematic part of this genocide. And I mean, it's just such an evil thing, to weaponize aid in this way. Because it also allowed them to say, oh, see, we can't be genociding. We created the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. But, I mean, it's not a humanitarian foundation because people are being killed. Like, the way that they produced this was to put 4 aid sites far away from, where people were in Gaza City, to try to empty Gaza through hunger. It's weaponizing hunger. It's a despicable thing to do. Instead of opposing this man-made humanitarian catastrophe, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, Jordan, and the United Kingdom, among others, parachuted aid into Gaza, an expensive, inadequate, and dangerous response. While preparing to be taking action to ease shortages, this only served to mislead international public opinion while the famine worsened. Economic trade relations, the fuel and profits of genocide. Israel is heavily reliant on international trade and economic cooperation, maintaining normal trade relations despite the illegality of its occupation and systematic human rights, humanitarian law violations, now escalated to genocide, legitimizes and sustains the Israeli apartheid regime. In 2024, international trade in goods and services equaled 54% of Israeli GDP, down from 61% in 2022. The EU, its largest trade partner, provided almost a third of total trade for the last 2 years. Imports beyond weapons are vital to secure the goods necessary to sustain the illegal occupation and other unlawful Israeli policies and practices. Many Israeli imports are dual-use goods, which can be used for the production of both civilian and military products. In 2024, these goods accounted for 31% of Israeli merchandise imports from the European Union. Israeli trade is reinforced by at least 45 economic cooperation agreements, including with the EU, the US, and the UAE, implementing the Abraham Accords. These agreements remove tariffs and non-tariff barriers for dual use and defense goods and services, while often failing to distinguish dealings with the OPT, implicitly recognizing Israeli authority over illegal settlers and their businesses and annexed land. This is the bare minimum. This is so crucial and the bare minimum. No good produced in Palestine should be labeled as produced in Israel. And no international treaty should be enforced with Israel because the International Court of Justice has specifically said so, that these treaties should be considered in terms of like what states can do to not help Israel carry out a genocide. It's such a low-hanging fruit that no one actually did. No one actually suspended trade relations or investment relations. And it is just so embarrassing that no one did. So there's some other types of cooperation. This is important. The obligation of third states to act against international law violations is often incorporated into treaties. For instance, the 1996 Turkey-Israel Free Trade Agreement conditions cooperation on respect of public policy, morality, international peace, and security. Similarly, the EU-Israel Association Agreement makes human rights and democratic principles an essential elements clause. It's funny because for example, when Peru negotiated its EU Free Trade Agreement, it was so important for the UN to have a human rights clause. The Peruvian government didn't want one, but Europe wanted one. It was so important. And yet, here it is, one of the biggest humanitarian atrocities of the 21st century. And they don't invoke it. It's just so patently awful. A 2024 internal paper of the EU, leaked in August 2025, shows how the EU was determined to preserve business as usual despite evidence of Israeli violations of the terms of the agreement in the face of the illegal occupation and genocide. The proposal of the European Commission to cancel core trade preferences on 37% of Israeli exports to the EU still await approval. Then energy trade on the supply of materials and weapons to Israel. So conclusion. Hey, we read this really fast. I'm glad. Conclusion. The genocide in Gaza was not committed in isolation, but as part of a system of global complicity, rather than ensuring that Israel respects the basic human rights and self-determination of Palestinian people. Powerful third states perpetuating colonial and racial capitalist practices that should have long been consigned to history have allowed violent practices to become an everyday reality. I love that Francesca is the only one who writes this way. She's the only one that actually brings racism and colonialism into everything she writes. And for that alone, she is such a gem to international law. No one else writes in this way. Everyone else wants to sanitize international law. Not her. She will say it front and center, and I think that is so important. Even as the genocidal violence became visible, states, mostly Western ones, have provided and continue to provide Israel with military, diplomatic, economic, and ideological support, even as it weaponized famine and humanitarian aid. The horrors of the past 2 years are not an aberration, but the culmination of a long history of complicity. Third states' acts, omissions, and discourse in support of a genocidal apartheid state are such that they could and should be held liable for aiding, assisting, or jointly participating in international wrongful acts within the context of systematic violations of peremptory norm and erga omnes norms. At this critical juncture, it is imperative that third states immediately suspend and review all military, diplomatic, and economic relations with Israel, as any such engagement could represent means to aid, assist, directly participate in unlawful acts, including war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Many third states have operated with the very impunity they have granted Israel. Their disregard for international law undermines the foundations of the multilateral order painstakingly built over 8 decades by states and people within the United Nations. This will stand in history as an offense not only to justice, but to the very idea of our common humanity. While justice must involve criminal trials, whether in international or domestic courts, accountability extends beyond prosecutions to include reparations, restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition by Israel and third states that have supported its crimes. So just to be clear, restitution, bringing the situation back to where it was before the violation. Compensation, when you cannot bring the violation to the status quo ante, you pay money. Rehabilitation, making sure that the offender knows that they acted wrong. Satisfaction, apologizing. And guarantees of non-repetition, promises that you will not do that again. All of that is reparations. The power structures that enabled these heinous crimes must be dismantled, and the international justice system shows the way to do it. The world is watching Gaza and the whole of Palestine. States must step up to their responsibilities. Only by fulfilling the Palestinian people's right to self-determination, so brazenly violated by the ongoing genocide, can enduring coercive global structures be dismantled. No state can credibly claim adherence to international law while arming, supporting, or shielding a genocidal regime. All military and political support must be suspended. Diplomacy should serve to prevent crimes rather than to justify them. Complicity in genocide must end. So the recommendations here says the special rapporteur urges states to cause no further harm to the Palestinian people and to exert pressure for a complete and permanent ceasefire and a complete withdrawal of Israeli troops, take immediate steps to end the siege in Gaza, support the reopening of Gaza's international airport, recognize Palestinian self-determination and justice as essential to lasting peace and security, suspending all military trade and diplomatic relations with Israel, investigate and prosecute all officials, corporates, and individuals involved in or facilitating genocide, incitement, crimes against humanity, and war crimes, and other grave breaches, secure reparations, including reconstruction and return, cooperate with the ICC and ICJ, reaffirm and strengthen UNRWA, suspend Israel from the United Nations under Article 6 of the UN Charter. And G, act under Uniting for Peace in line with the General Assembly Resolution 3775 to ensure that Israel dismantles its occupation. I love that she puts these things out there. Like, these are the tools that we have. No one really invokes them. Maybe only Petro, the Colombian president. The Special Rapporteur also urges trade unions, lawyers, civil society, and ordinary citizens to monitor the state's actions in response to these recommendations and to continue to press institutions, governments, and corporations for boycotts, divestments, and sanctions until the end of the Israeli illegal occupation and related crimes. Okay, so that's it. We finished reading it. Oh my god, I can't believe it. That was faster than I anticipated. So essentially this report, as the other two, the one that dealt with corporate responsibility, the anatomy of a genocide, and the colonial erasure. Actually, this is the fourth report, not the third. I said it was the third. It's the fourth report on the Gaza genocide. I think it's so important that she is doing this, that she is bringing receipts and saying, these are all the things that you did that are unlawful. And I do still hold some hope that her reports will end up being an essential component of the eventual campaign for justice and accountability for the Gaza genocide. I really do hope so. I don't think it'll be anytime soon, because I think what's happening right now is they are trying to get rid of the ICC prosecutor and scuttle the investigations. I think there's several media reports that point in that direction, that there's a campaign to get rid of the ICC's investigation. The United States is going to sanction any ICC judge that looks into this, or I think soon it will sanction the ICJ judges. So you can't really have accountability in conditions like this. You can't really have an international rules-based order or anything like it. And essentially what the Gaza genocide is showing is that international law doesn't exist for the West. When the West wants to commit genocide, it commits genocide, and there's nothing you can do. So I think it is important to push back, and people like Francesca are so important in that pushback. I think she's doing an excellent job in bringing the receipts. So yeah, read this report. I'm gonna put the link in the chat so that you can access it, so that you can see it. Yeah. So Iconoclast says, I might be missing something, but why aren't there already legal cases brought against governments like the UK, France, and Germany for aiding war crimes? Are they waiting for the genocide case to be over at the ICJ? I mean, it probably has to do with the fact that even under domestic systems, it is sometimes difficult to sue head of state or head of government while they are head of state or head of government, right? Investigations are usually like more difficult in those conditions, or sometimes even worse. The investigation ends up being political. So sometimes, say, to prosecute a sitting president in Peru, you need to go through Congress, and you don't want to do that for accountability. So it might have to do with that, to be honest. Oh, hey, Magic of Carols, thanks for subscribing. Was that loud? I think that was very loud. I thought we had fixed this. What happened? So stupid chat. Oh, I'm so sorry about that. I should have said that in the I should have said that in the housekeeping section. Time has changed in the United Kingdom. It is now GMT time, no longer BST, British Summer Time, is over, and we are now in Greenwich Meridian Time. So yeah, if your clocks have not also changed 1 hour back, bear that in mind for the time I'm going to start, streaming. Jartov says that 5-step list for reparations is such a good framework, I have to write it down. Yeah, that is pretty standard legal jargon. It's a compensation, restitution, non-repetition, satisfaction, and the other one rehabilitation. So yeah, it's pretty good. But it is pretty standard in legal terms. It's not just international law related. Even when you're dealing with a domestic case, those are your avenues of to get redress. Iconoclast says, I wasn't expecting it either. 7 p.m. now in France. Well, but Europe is also, continental Europe is also going to move back, an hour, right? I think so. Sorry about that. Jartov says, the solid list just makes it so much easier to communicate. Yeah, that is true. Okay, so that is Francesca Albanese's report.